Hello and welcome to Taking Liberties, episode 6 of season 5. We're actually doing this a bit unusually. We're doing a second episode for the week because why not? Because we're free, we can do whatever we want. And I'm joined by my excellent co-conspirators, Vickers and Zeev, over in the East
G'day.
Coast. So we're going to talk about two topics. We're going to talk about George Brandis leaving the Senate, making a comment about right-wing populism being on the rise and, attacking the fundamentals of liberalism and conservatism, which is always a wonderfully self-serving thing for him to say as he exits the Senate. And we're also going to talk about the other thing, health insurance. That's right. We were talking about a third topic before we started. I nearly got confused. We're talking about health insurance because the profits, I tell you, the profits are bad. They're evil. We can't have them. And
He had all
Labour
those
is
insult
guaranteed
the profit.
is says these profits and this evil corporation profiteering. Got to stop, man. So yeah.
Well, in other words, Bill Shorten is asking to cap, on top of already capped interest rate premium hikes by private insurers. He wants to cap them even more than they are.
Yes. Well, let's start with that. So I think we just laid it out as it is.
Yeah, I was just going to say, so they're not technically capped, but what actually happens is, and I've got the page open right now. So what happens is every year, according to the Private Health Insurance Act of 2007, a calculator.
Thanks, John Howard.
Yes, there's a calculator.
Howard.
Yeah, it was introduced under. Yeah, so there's a calculation that's applied by the Australian Prudential Regulatory Authority. For anyone who's not familiar, APRA is one of our regulators for the financial industry. Now they go through. They've got a very simple calculation where they basically calculate the premium and compare it to the CPI to sort of get an idea how much the premium should increase by against the healthcare costs as part of the CPI. Now,
that was a lot of information.
That was a lot of information. So now they're not capped at anything per se other than the healthcare cost itself. So what the idea is basically, if your premium is rising, it represents a rise in healthcare costs, right? So there's meant to be
even more than the CPI. Even more than the CPI. Okay.
Even more than the CPI, yeah.
Okay. So for anyone who doesn't know, CPI, Consumer Price Index, issued quarterly, and basically what's going on is that, if I understand it correctly, because the premiums are going up by an amount that the health insurers declare, but which isn't actually controlled by APRA. And APRA issues just statements to say this is how much it's going up by compared to CPI?
Okay. Sorry. The actual formula, which is on their site, takes a look at the average healthcare cost increase, right?
Okay.
And then compares that to the premium paid last year to calculate the new average premium rate.
Okay.
And everybody sits around the average premium rate.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
So the bottom line is essentially the government sets the price for or sets the increases based on a formula they have. So it's not a free market. It's essentially insurers go cap in hand to government, say this is what we want to raise premiums by. The government then says yay or nay, and essentially sets a rate for the premium increases.
That reflects average healthcare costs.
Yes. Yep.
Yeah.
In some sense. Okay. So what I'm curious about then is why are private health insurers then making a ruckus about this being against the free market? Because one such private health insurance body, its spokesperson said, well, what's next? Are we going to cap supermarket costs? Are we going to cap insurance costs generally, and so on and so forth? As if this was part of an agenda to introduce caps that were unknown before in this health insurance market. But it seems as if they already exist. Is that right?
It's not a cap. Okay. So it's not a cap, right? But if you take a look at that formula, right, the way this formula is adjusted, right, it's based on healthcare costs. In my mind, it's doing the right thing. right? If you were going to regulate prices, you should regulate the price in accordance to a healthcare, the actual cost of it, right? Now, what Bill Shorten is saying sounds like it doesn't actually look at that. It sounds like what he's going to be doing is saying, I will only allow a 2% rise this year. But if he's only allowing a 2% rise this year, healthcare costs can go up by 8%, right? So say if, if there's been like what usually happens is, nurses and doctors and all sorts of that negotiate through their unions the prices. All of that gets tacked on to the consumer of that product, right?
Interesting.
So it could be more than the 2%.
So the comment, so the exact quote from, so this is all before the National Press Club. Shorten went in front of that about a week ago, and he said, for years, private health premiums have been rising at triple the rate of inflation, way above the pace of wages. Australians are paying some of the highest out-of-pocket costs in the OECD. I'm not talking about the small operators in this industry or the not-for-profits, but an industry that's raked in, wait for it, $1.8 billion in profit, boo, hiss, before tax last year, despite holding $6 billion over and above the legal capital requirement. And
so they have a lot of savings,
and they receive $6
which is
billion
not quite the same
subsidies
as
each
saying
year.
that their profit margins are healthy, because apparently average profit margins in the industry are 5.5%.
That's actually pretty good.
Yeah, well according to Bill Shorten, though, private health insurers are making 25% profits.
No, hang on. Yeah, but that's government controlled anyway. But what I'm saying is, okay, so he's complaining that they've got too much of a risk pool. Is that what I'm hearing?
No, he's saying the people, Vickers. Think of the people. The people are paying too much.
He's saying they're making too much and they're charging too
many
much.
in profits. Vickers, come on.
But they're
Why do you hate people?
But they're non-profit. So the vast majority of that sector is non-profit, right? There's only, 3 or 4 big for-profit private insurance agencies. Yep. Right? The vast majority of that space is non-profit. So I would expect a high savings amount, right? Because they can't. They can only hand it back to members or use it as a pool that they can dig into. They can't really reinvest that money, right? Because they're a non-profit.
The problem for you is you're thinking like a normal person. You think, let's actually look at this situation and think about what's happening and why they're doing what they're doing. You're not thinking like Bill Shorten, which is, I want a big stick to whack these evil corporations, Vickers. Come on.
Yeah.
What's wrong with you?
Yeah, fair point. Yeah.
It's nothing. It's got nothing to do with anything remotely within the sphere of common, of any sort of economic analysis or good policy. He wants a big stick to beat. I mean, it's like friggin' Turnbull and the banks. There's no substance to their policies except we just want to whack the banks because we want to whack the banks because they're evil, Vickers. Come on.
Can I pause there for a moment? I mean, the fact is that a lot of the rise of the cost of health insurance premiums, I mean, we can split it into a few factors. Obviously, there's the fact that we have an aging population, so our healthcare needs increase over time. Fine. Okay, that's true.
That's probably the biggest factor.
Yeah. And I'm not arguing that it's not a major factor, but biggest or not, I don't know. But another factor that deserves to be mentioned is red tape, right? I mean, there's a lot of red tape in practically every part of the medical industry. Doctors have to study for at least, 7 years to be GP, more to be anything else other than GP nowadays. That's an incredible amount, far more than it was before, which I think was about 4 or 5 years of medicine. So that means there's a lot of people who just drop out because they can't afford to finish. And what that results in is fewer doctors, higher prices. You take that across into various industries and take the red tape issue across to various parts of the medical industry, and you'll have the same issues happening again and again. You have publications now just today saying, oh, look, there's this new HIV drug that's been issued. It costs $10,000 per dosage, but now the government is subsidising it to $400 or something per dose under the PBS scheme. But the fact is, I think by the time they discover how to do it, it's actually not expensive to produce. What's expensive is the patent. I mean,
well,
patents
and all
in medicine,
the billions of dollars of research that went to get to there.
Yeah, absolutely. The billions of dollars of research that went to get to that was expensive. I'm acknowledging. I'm saying after that's happened, producing the drug at the end point is actually not that expensive.
Yeah.
What's expensive, what hikes up the price to 10K a tablet, is the patent.
Yeah.
Okay. And again, the patents in various parts of the medical industry obviously raise healthcare costs substantially.
I mean, this whole situation makes me think of private schools. So my wife works for a private school. She works for an Anglican school here in WA, and they're not really private schools, though. I mean, you think about it. You know, the government tells them what they can teach, what they can't teach, who they can hire, who they can't hire. You know, they basically set the model. I mean, there's very few schools that don't operate in the same, factory farming model that schools have been doing for 150 years, and that's because essentially they all get money from the government, and therefore government gets to set all the rules. And it's much the same with private health issues. Yes, they're private in the sense they're owned by shareholders, but they're not private in the sense that they're operating in a free market. They're operating in a system where the government sets all the prices, sets all the rules. There's very limited capacity to actually, break away from that at all, because the government's just entangled itself in every aspect. So, to the extent that they are profitable or not
part
profitable,
of the issue,
it's got nothing to do with their greed. It's got everything to do with how regulation works. But Bill Shorten can't go after regulators because he likes regulators, and the unions fill his coffers for at election time. So, identifying the actual problem, which is, well, how do we reform the system so that we drive down costs that aren't, not in a centrally planned fashion, but in a, by decentralizing. Well, he can't really do that. Well, he could do it, but he doesn't do it, A, because he thinks the market is evil, and B, because he'd have to attack the people whose support he wants, which is bureaucrats.
First of all, I'm not sure that Shorten believes the market is evil. I think he's playing to the base. The second point
probably
I mentioned
too strong.
is,
I suspect he would say that the free market is good but flawed, and we need the government to stop market failure. Blah blah blah. Which is really just saying, I don't trust these plebs over here. I want to, it's everybody says, it's even like short of actual legitimate Marxists. Everybody says the free market's great. So it's not very informative. I mean, essentially, he doesn't trust the market to do anything. So keep going.
The other point I would make is an important aspect of private health insurance in Australia that increases costs is the fact that everyone's premiums are paying for the care of people who obtained coverage, which is not really insurance coverage from private healthcare insurance. What I mean by that is that people who have certain existing conditions which they already had before they signed on to get private healthcare coverage, they can still be treated for those conditions after a limited amount of time. And the effect of that is that basically...
You're talking about pre-existing conditions?
Yes.
Yeah, Australia doesn't do that. No, we if you have a pre-existing condition, you won't be covered. But that's because we have public healthcare. The private healthcare insurer won't cover you, but you can still go on the public system. Yeah, check your private contract. It has an entire clause about pre-existing conditions. I know about this because I'm on Defence Health, and we do exclude pre-existing conditions all the time. The soldiers on Defence Health will go to the public system if they join Defence Health after an injury. It happens all the time with tradies trying to join the military after they've had an arm injury or something like that.
As I read it, there's a pre-existing condition rule, but that imposes a 12-month waiting period on benefits for hospital treatment for pre-existing conditions. So after that waiting period ends, then the pre-existing condition period no longer applies. All right, so that's for private health insurance, and that's from the Commonwealth Ombudsman, and they have a fact sheet on it. So what that means is that if you, as an individual, get a serious, ongoing, debilitating illness, it lasts over 12 months, and you've signed up as you got it, then you will get that cover. Now, what that means effectively is that part of Australia's private health care system is in fact geared towards elderly people who aren't getting insurance, they're just getting subsidised coverage from young people paying the premiums. It's another way of public health care, effectively. It's the Obamacare model in a lot of ways. So the effect of that is to drive up healthcare costs, and as we've seen, by the way, in terms of the data, that means in turn that premiums rise and young people drop out, leaving a decreasing pool of people to subsidise the increasingly elderly population that relies on these this coverage for pre-existing conditions. So, I mean, that's not to say that these healthcare insurers are being wiped out as we speak. The situation isn't that bad, but it still is an issue that drives up costs. That's the other rule. That's the other. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. There's tons of stuff that drives up costs, including the fact that all the entire healthcare industry in Australia, at least, is heavily unionised. Whether it's the doctors, nurses, even the pharmaceutical guild, for example.
It's incredible. You're quite right about that as well. I mean, there are even legislated ratios of nurses to patients in public hospitals in Victoria. They don't apply, I should say, to private hospitals. So perhaps, private insurers would probably pay for some people in public hospitals. So I guess that's a factor as well. And I mean, a lot of people say, look, we need a certain amount of nurses to, care for people. But the fact is that actually means that some basic administrative tasks that unskilled people that don't have nursing care can do, like cleaning beds and all of that, is done by nurses instead. It's a payout to the nurses' unions. So, again, that's another factor. It's just an example of what you mentioned, basically, that these sectors are unionised and they're skimming off the top, I guess. Gee, we're having a go at nurses. I mean, aren't they just the most popular people in the entire country? I mean, if you looked at the trusted professions list, I bet they're above doctors for that matter.
Well, you have to trust the people that wipe your ass.
Oh, good Lord. Yes.
Like that's not a dig at nurses. I'm saying I would literally trust the person that wipes my ass. I'm sorry.
Okay, so just to go, this is like literally from a CanStar, which I think is a health insurer of some sort. It says under their page, all health funds are required by law to provide cover to patients who have pre-existing conditions.
Yeah.
And
so this is an Australian website. So
yeah. And I took that fact sheet from the Commonwealth
Ombudsman
I had
a look at it. It wasn't clear if they were mandated to provide it. It said like it seemed to be from that whether it was required or not. But yeah, like definitely. I went looking legislation.
So I forgot that after the 12 months that they get grandfathered in, that's why most health funds kick you off as soon as they find out. Right at the beginning. Yeah, so anyway, nurses are top-rated in profession, according to Roy Morgan, top-rated profession at 94%.
Wow. So, and here we are just putting them down like, not
we're
them, but their
libertarians. We don't
union
care about
at any
people.
rate.
We hate people. So it's because we're heartless bastards.
I guess.
Holy shit, engineers are like 5th most trusted. What the hell are you doing?
You're the voice of reason.
Well, generally they're not known
the
for
rest of us.
To blow people up
I'm a solicitor. I must be right at the bottom. Even though I'm heavily regulated, I bet solicitors are just like
35%. You're actually lawyers are smack bang in the middle.
Really? Wow.
Oh,
yeah.
The bottom's like
rental
car, is like second-hand car salesman, isn't it?
The lowest is car salesman.
Yeah.
Wow.
Followed by advertising people, followed by real estate agents, followed by insurance brokers.
Insurance broker.
Okay.
Yeah,
What's wrong
and then stockbrokers, followed by talkback radio announcers, followed by
Talkback radio? I'd put them at 0.
yeah,
Oh God.
talkback.
Yeah.
But the funny part is, after talkback radio announcers, it's newspaper journalists.
Oh,
Wow.
that's novel.
Yeah.
So they're distrusted as well. But I wouldn't be surprised at that.
Yeah, and a newspaper journalist is only marginally above them. Not even kidding. It's like 2 percentage points above. That's
But where do
amazing.
politicians go in the list?
Higher than the media.
Really?
Wow.
Holy shit.
Yeah, way higher
That
than the
is
media.
scary.
What is wrong with us as a country?
Not just higher than the media, above public servants.
Oh.
Wow.
We trust our
Well, I
politicians
guess that's the
more
benefit
than the
of having a
public
personality
servants.
cult. So, speaking of personality
incredible.
cults and politicians, let's
This is
turn
the Roy
to,
Morgan poll, by the way. I recommend everyone look. It's fucking hilarious.
George Brandis, former Attorney General.
Attorney General. Former Attorney General. Yep.
In the federal government. He
Oh,
had
it's
his,
just the guy who brought in metadata.
Yes, this is the
Yes.
guy, which is going to be relevant when we get to talk about individual rights. So he is leaving to become the High Commissioner to the UK because
He's going to Thought Crime Island.
pretty much
Yeah.
he'll fit in nicely. And on his way out, he took a big swing at some of his colleagues. He's warned about right-wing populism. So he talked about, I'll quote it, "We have seen the development of right-wing postmodernism, a set of attitudes which had its origin in the authoritarian mind of the left that has been translated right across the political spectrum. This presents the threat to both liberalism and conservatism, and a profound challenge to the Liberal Party as the custodian of those liberal traditions." He also talked about getting rid of concern for individual rights and respect for institutions in favour of a belligerent, intolerant populism that shows no respect for either the rights of individual citizens or the traditional institutions that protect them. So, this is seen as a sort of a dig at Peter Dutton and Cory Bernardi and Pauline Hanson.
So I question. I can see where he's coming from. I mean, there is a concept known as the postmodern left, and I suppose actually postmodernism in general. Because I did one philosophy subject at university, and it just so happened to cover not postmodernism in its entirety, but like postmodernism as a construct, and it's look, at the time they were talking about God, what's the name? American dude. He was just the
no, not Marley. Sorry.
Yeah, never mind. Forget it. There's this concept called structuralism, and it's about postmodernists consider themselves post-structuralists. They don't believe in institutions or anything like that. They just believe in power games, winning. There's no concept of objective reality. I mean, these are like traits that generally describe postmodernism. So postmodernism, to me, at least as I've always understood it, is basically left-wing at its core. So the idea of a postmodern right would be interesting. I just don't know how you would translate that from at least the philosophical thought of what it is to who would represent that. But if you were to pick someone, I would have said Milo Yiannopoulos is probably an example of that, because he's a fucking troll. He doesn't actually care about pushing a structural view as to, hey, this is my philosophy. He just cares about trolling the left, right? And there's very few people that kind of fit into that space, in my opinion.
So, firstly, I would recommend, if you want to hear an actual postmodernist talk about politics, the Unregistered podcast with Thaddeus Russell. He's a historian who identifies, he talks about postmodernism pretty much in every episode. He has what I call the postmodernist challenge, which is essentially somebody will say something about evil or good, and he'll then say, yes, but postmodernism, and there's a big discussion. So I've learned a heap from that podcast, and I suspect if he was here, he would dispute this usage of postmodernism, because I think for a lot of people it's just like a slur. He would probably say something along the lines that, like Jacques Derrida and Michel Foucault, they were essentially almost libertarian. Like, they weren't actually libertarian, but like their ideas about how you should interact with each other were pretty libertarian. That is, leaving people alone was a big...
Apparently in later life
Yeah, so
was
I
quite
think,
sympathetic to libertarian
Yeah.
ideas. But go on.
yeah, no, like I think he basically like their policy prescriptions, insofar that they had some
Foucault.
pretty.
Did you say Foucault? Did you say Foucault was
Foucault.
pretty?
Yes.
But
I
was
can't.
it-
I mean, again, I'd point people to this podcast. That's what
Yeah.
Russell says. I can't.
wasn't
Okay.
the thing I remember about Foucault was mostly being anti-psychiatry.
I'm
like the
sure he
idea that
was
you could-
many things,
yeah,
but
like you know, like you couldn't really like his big thing was you couldn't really. Anyway, yeah, I'm like getting really.
so,
into the
so anyway, like
Leaving
like,
that aside, we're
Thaddeus-
getting a bit distracted.
Sure.
Yeah.
And
His point
we
is
got
that-
distracted a lot there, but I think it's interesting that Brandis is having a go at people like Dutton and the person replacing him. I think he's having a go at the person replacing him, Jim Molan, because if you look at Jim Molan, he has certainly affiliated himself with the right of the party. He speculated, for example, in the past, openly that the right to habeas corpus, in other words, the right to not be detained by the government unless you've been charged with a crime, could be suspended in the event of another terrorist attack. And that might be something that perhaps could be looked at as an option, so to speak, if that happens, to fight terrorism.
As much as I would like to consider that a controversial idea, so notable people that have done it in the past: George Washington, Abraham Lincoln, William Churchill. I mean, it's like some of the greatest people in history have suspended habeas corpus. It's not exactly holy writ in terms of like, you know, if you get rid of this, you're a freaking tyrant.
That's because war is the health of the state. So
Yeah.
the pretext for the removal of all these legal protections is, well, we've
War.
got to stop the terrorists, or
Yeah.
insert evil enemy here. And so that's, you know, and unsurprisingly, Jim Molan is in favor of war, you know, in favor of going to war with all these different groups. So,
Yeah.
you know.
So the real test for me, when someone says they want to get rid of habeas corpus, is how long for, right? And if their answer is as long as the war is there, then my immediate response to that is, then you really haven't considered this, because even Churchill, right, said, I will get rid of it at the end of the war, the moment that Germany surrenders. So
sure, but I imagine the laws stay on the books. So these things are usually don't have sunset clauses inserted into them. They usually hang around and they get readapted. And that's the whole ratcheting. And to be honest, George Brandis is complete shit when it comes to this stuff, because, you know, he talked like, you know, like there's an article on the Conversation which says, you know, Brandis is also blunt in his rejection of those who want to see the government seek to inject more partisanship into national security. And he talks about the 8 tranches of national security legislation. Well, you want to talk about individual rights, you want to talk about the rule of law. George Brandis, you suck. You are terrible. You know, like there's...
Can we get away from criticising George Brandis for a moment and turn to the people he is criticising? And if we look at Jim Molan, he has suggested, for example, that... let's see, migration from certain, quote, extremist nations should be suspended. Australians should, let's see, it's time to give up even more rights. We can decide to do that before that bad event or after the bad event. So he's actually, I think the first thing we've got to give up is habeas corpus. But society won't approve of that until after the big event. So he's actually saying we should give up habeas corpus now. Yeah. We should just let the government arrest anyone now without a trial and keep them indefinitely now. So this has got to be the most extremist open statement in public by an Australian senator that I've heard of in a mainstream political party for a while, I must say.
But to be fair...
That's not to say that it's going to become law tomorrow, but...
No, it's not. But to be fair, so James Molan is from the military, and his views aren't entirely out of line with what is common with people who serve in the serve in certain sections of the armed services, particularly relating to security. They would like more power. They have a lot of. The funny thing is, it's always the people that have never worked in security that seem to be like all gung ho about giving more power to security. As soon as people actually work in there, they're just like, yeah, this is a bad idea, because they don't realize that security is not that different. Like, you know, the people that run security, like your average security professional. No, your security professional is effectively just another human being.
Yeah.
They're just specializing in security. In fact, I think in general, if you're an extremely pro security person, it's just like what I say, like people who are pro waterboarding. Hey, go out and get waterboarded. Or in the case of security, go walk into a house that's like got like cameras monitoring everywhere, and then tell me how you feel about that security. So, yeah, I mean, his views are extreme for Parliament, but I don't think they're exactly out of line for his previous occupation, which is the military.
No,
that's probably and sadly enough true. Yes.
And I think that's true of all military type thinking. You know, you think about every military dictatorship there has been. When was the last one you saw that was actually, you know, cared about the rule of law? Well, that's why we have civilian-led military here.
Pinochet?
You mean the guy who just didn't he like summarily just kill people?
Augusto Pinochet allegedly killed 42 people at the beginning of his rule, and that's it.
And I was pretty sure that the Pinochet, you know, plenty of political opponents just sort of disappeared. That it's in the thousands of the people who disappeared.
Yeah. And,
so that doesn't strike me as rule of law. Like, I mean, for all the failings of the US or Australia, I suspect the number of people who have just disappeared as a result of government agents just taking them away and them just, you know, never being found again is pretty small.
Sure.
Following his... look, let's leave aside the Pinochet debate at the moment. At the very least...
Just to say...
Thank you for the trolling, Vickers.
This is one of the reasons why I'm actually deeply uncomfortable with military people going into Parliament.
No,
because I think you know, if you look at the Molins and the what's his name from WA, the SAS guy, whose name escapes me. Anyway, he's the member for Canning. He was SAS. Jackie Lambie is very similar. She was like reserve, I think. But, you know, they all have a very similar sort of attitude of, well, these legal rights things, who gives a shit about that? Let's just get on with, you know, fighting the terrorists.
The funny thing is, like, this, you know, there was the Ben Franklin quote, and you know what? Everybody's aware of this. Anyone who gives up a little liberty to get security doesn't get either, nor deserves both. Yeah. And that's the reality. Like, the thing is, all these legal proofs exist to protect you, right? They're not. Yes, they protect other people as well, but they're there to protect you. So if you get rid of them, you never know when that could be used against you.
Well, the thing is, they're the ones in power. They won't be the ones.
If you let police detain people without a trial and imprison them indefinitely, you're handing a heck of a lot of power to police. Power corrupts. That's the reality of it. If all that it takes to imprison someone indefinitely is, I don't know, an affidavit or something, a statement from a policeman that someone has, he believes, done something wrong, you're going to have policemen get it wrong, and you're going to have policemen perhaps exaggerate because they think that it's the right person to go after. You're going to have these situations where police go after the wrong man, and they'll get the wrong man. They do all the time today. It's not going to be any different just because they won't be able to. You won't be able to test the allegations in court. The fact is, police are not perfect. Fine, a lot of the time they do get, you know, the guilty party or so on, but some of the time they don't. And I guess I'm not very comfortable with the idea of just taking their word for it, because I think the more we take their word for it, the more slack they're going to be about it, and that's not a comforting idea to me.
I mean, one way you can think about this whole thing, and we should probably wrap up soon because we're over time, but, you know, the way I try to think about anybody who's in the military is they're part of a government bureaucracy. So, you know, if the former second in charge or whatever from the Department of Education goes into Parliament and says, oh, what we need to do this thing to really work is to give the government more power to do this thing. Well, I think most conservatives would be very skeptical. They'd say, well, you are part of a system that doesn't work, that seeks to advance its own power. Well, why should we think any different about the military? They're just a bureaucracy like anybody else. They're completely removed from consequences, from any sort of blowback. They're insulated from, you know, they go into these places, they blow shit up, they do what they think works, and they pay no price. Well,
death. I mean, some of them pay the price of death.
Well, some soldiers will, but generally it's not like the long-term consequences are felt by, you know, like the
general.
Yeah, exactly. Well, particularly the generals, but also just in terms of, you know, countries falling to shit and being taken over by terrorists and all the sorts of consequences we see in foreign policy. Yeah. You know, they don't suffer that sort of stuff. They can, you know, send in all these troops and think, we've succeeded, when really all you've done is killed a bunch of innocent people, killed a bunch of your own soldiers, and made things worse. So, I mean, I just don't think we should treat Jim Mullen's observation about what needs to be done in the war on terror any differently than we should treat any other bureaucrat. And it's to be extremely skeptical and to see most of it as self-serving nonsense.
Luckily, he's only one of 76 senators, so as extreme as he is, he's only got 1 in 76 of the voice.
I mean, you know, Peter Dutton is going to defer to him. Andrew Hastie, who was the guy I was trying to think of before. There's a lot of, and I mean, this is sort of separate from the right-wing populism, though I think it's tied into it a fair bit, particularly on the issue of immigration. You know, these guys are going to love Jim Mullen because he's a general. You know, he is like the most honourable person, well, a former general, but, you know, like he's in their minds, in the, you know, the right-wing mind, that's almost the ideal position. You know, like they are the most respectable people. Like when we think about rankings of trustworthiness, general would sit up the top because the military aesthetic is like what they aspire to. They want a country that's unified. They want a country that fights the bad guys. You know, in their mind, militarism is like, you know, is the embodiment of a lot of that stuff, and Jim Mullen is the embodiment of militarism.
Quite. All right. Well,
all right. Hang on. Wait. I actually want to wait a minute. Okay, I just wanted to confirm where the military generals sit. Military is just above accountants and below university lecturers.
What percentage?
Sorry, 56.
Okay. Where do accountants sit? Because being an aspirant.
Accountants are at 50.
Oh, okay. Well, that's all right.
Yeah.
Cool. All right. Well, that's it for this special.
Police are trusted more.
Oh, how disappointing.
But just in case
trust
people
police.
By the way, just in case it wasn't clear, I know there's probably going to be a whole bunch of Chileans going like Pinochet was a mass murderer. I know.
Oh my
it's a joke within it's a joke within the libertarian community that there are legitimately some libertarians that believe Pinochet was not a mass murderer. It was a joke.
Okay.
Anyway, continuing.
All right. Not a very good one, but okay.
Well, as long as you upset the right people, it's okay to make jokes about mass murderers, Steve. You just need to understand that.
Okay.
If you're triggering the left, all sins are forgiven. Okay.
I wanted to trigger the libertarians here, but apparently I might have been shot. But okay.
All right, that's it for this special episode of Taking Liberties. We'll be back on Monday with the next episode 7. Yeah, that's it. I got to count. And make sure you like and share and subscribe all our episodes. We are on iTunes and we're on YouTube. And yeah, that's it. Thanks, everyone.